All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to TC3, Telecom Council Carrier Connections to the Third. This is our fourth TC3 event in 2011, and it's got a nice history of 3 prior years, and we're growing every year, making the event somewhat bigger and somewhat better. The goal of TC3 every year has been to have one forum where the Telecom Council kind of brings the carriers and turns the tables on them. We have a whole year where startups pitch the carriers their ideas and pitch VCs their ideas, and this meeting is supposed to turn that on its head and have the carriers pitch the Silicon Valley community as to what we're looking for in innovation and the best mechanisms to connect with us and the best entry points to come in and talk to us as a large entity that's sometimes difficult to work with. History, in the past 3 years, we've had just the carriers come up and make those speeches. Of course, they tell us about the innovation areas they're focused on, and they tell us about the ways of connecting, but they don't necessarily have the case studies in hand. And so a lot of people in the audience the previous year said, what about bringing up some startups and having their stories, specifically as it relates to doing biz dev with a carrier? So this year, we have multiple examples of case studies. So we'll have the carriers on stage, and we'll also have some of the companies from Silicon Valley and some of the innovators who had partnered with them successfully to talk about how that mechanism functioned, how they got into the carrier, and some advice for the startup community and how they might want to approach it as well. So that's kind of an improvement and a change we made this year. I'm really looking forward to having those discussions up here on the stage. I've got a laundry list, as always, of things to tell you about and to warn you about and to guide you throughout the day. So I'll run through these because they are necessary. There are press in the room, so for our speakers, anybody's going to ask questions. It's not a closed forum, so just bear that in mind if that's something that's important to your particular company, if you're in a quiet period or something to that effect. So we thank the press and welcome them to this meeting, and hope to hear and read some stories about it later on. With regards to bathrooms, pretty simple. You walk out in the hallway that across from where you were eating breakfast. Across the hall from that are some fairly large bathrooms. The layout we have here is the auditorium is where the presentations and speeches will get made. A lot of you just had breakfast in the next set of rooms over. That's where our banquet room is. We'll have breakfast and lunch in that room. There's demo areas with a lot of interesting startups and larger companies demonstrating their stuff. I think a lot of you have already seen some of them. There's a pod of about 8 of them over there just down the stairs from the auditorium, and also inside of the lunch and banquet room there's about 6 or 7 pods as well, with some interesting demos. So be sure to walk up and have a look at what they're showing at the demo tables. With regards to cell phones, please throw them down to the lower level. Of course, we always encourage carrying cell phones in this organization, but keeping them down. Let's see if there's any. So there's a couple of really fun things that we're doing as well this year. So everybody has surveys regarding the event, and if you've got a survey in front of you or had one handed to you, please be sure to turn those in as you leave at the check-in table or drop them off with one of the Telecom Council staff so that we are able to gather those up. One of the things Telecom Council does is we track our meetings very carefully, try to continuously improve, but we also gather information on who the interesting speakers, interesting startups were for our award ceremonies at the end of the year. There's going to be a raffle at lunch, and a lot of you have already entered in this. We mentioned it online. And the way to enter it is if you say you're attending this meeting on Facebook and say, there's something they have to do on LinkedIn as well. So on LinkedIn, say you're attending as well. Then you're in entrance, you have automatically entered for a Samsung Focus GSM phone with Windows 7 on it, and courtesy of Microsoft, so they're providing that prize. You have to do that by the break because we'll be doing the drawing at lunch, and we have to kind of check those social networks and make sure we tabulate everybody who qualified. So that's kind of a neat little thing. If you've already done that, you're entered. And then people who complete the surveys, every completed survey is entered in a drawing for one of 4 $100 Visa cash cards. So that's an incentive for people to finish up the surveys. So with that, I guess I'm the first speaker up, so I can kind of segment myself pretty easily. The transition shouldn't be too hard. For those of you who are familiar with the Telecom Council, you've probably seen me before. I tend to chair a lot of the events. I'm the in-house analyst of sorts. I'm also chairman of the Telecom Council. Today there will be a lot of me. I'll be chairing the event. I'll be moderating some of the panels. I apologize for that in advance. Although everybody had August, and Telecom Council tends to go quiet in August, and so it's been a break from me and for me, so ready to roll. I believe that is everything we had to cover. And with that, I guess I'd like to, now I can't see too well out there, but I wanted to introduce the Telecom Council staff, but I don't see too many, so I'll do that later on. And I'll go into my presentation. So this presentation is going to be relatively quick. I just want to set the stage for the kind of climate we find ourselves in today, 2011, in the telecom industry worldwide, and of course specifically Silicon Valley for us. It's going to be optimistic. It's a pretty good climate, and so we'll go through some of the slides and talk about it. If I go to, I got my advancer here. So I'll go to the first slide. First of all, it's going to be the same old charts. You know, we see a lot of startups come in and say, "Look, here's a chart that shows video is increasing." You've all seen these charts, so I'm not going to act like these are new to you, but I'm going to try to interpret them slightly differently and talk about how this particular era is really interesting for partnerships between telcos and the entrepreneur community. So these charts are from a variety of reliable sources. You can see the world telephone connections shooting through the roof up and to the right. On the bottom chart, we see this is the growth for network equipment, software, and telecom, basically infrastructure equipment. Also on a nice steady upward climb. There's opportunity for growth for infrastructure providers, content providers, handset providers, OS providers, application vendors, everyone. Big trends, of course, are that these two lines represent, as you know, the voice decline and the data decline. So as I said, something everybody's seen. Important trend, though, because for over 15 years here in Silicon Valley, we've been talking about mobile internet. It's been kind of a dream. And for the first decade or so of it, it was something that maybe a lot of the people in the room, we did on our flip phones, and we had, we had PQAs, the first smartphones that married Qualcomm with a Palm OS and such. And we thought, this is real. Look, I can look up sports scores. But the reality is nobody in the rest of the world was following us. But this takes it, it's gone to the rest of the world. What happens when we see these two graphs changing and we lose the voice and we gain on the data is that the phone companies are out of their comfort zone now. They've been able to provide dial tone for decades and decades and decades reliably, and that's what they're really good at. But the mobile data services are not. So this is one of the drivers behind their need to find partners who can help them in this brave new world. So it drives a diversity of services. Sorry, I jumped ahead too much. Drives a diversity of services that they're not prepared for, and the need for partnerships. So also, handset sales still growing strongly. So in the upper chart, you can see handset sales steadily rising, but you see the smartphone part of that rising incredibly. That just ties into the importance that this smartphone market has, and those are the devices that carry the data services that are not the telecom's core strength. This is a breakdown of a cell phone spend. And basically the idea is, I don't expect anybody to see and read all these little sections, but the idea is like, this used to be one box phone, voice. And now this is what you start seeing as a breakdown of the kind of apps and services that people are using and paying for on their bills. The diversity of the bill split is amazing when you contrast it with a decade ago was just voice. So telcos are billing for a tremendous range of services as well as the comfort zone and core skill set. The important word I put in there in all caps is billing. And because there's billing, that means that's where the money goes first from the consumer. So as an entrepreneur or startup, there are definitely opportunities in going over the top, and I've always been very sanguine and honest about that. There's a lot of startups that might just want to go over the top, might want to be disruptive, compete with telcos. That could be the right business plan for a lot of people. But given that there are companies out there that are billing and collecting the money from the consumers, those become very attractive channels to market as well. There's money for partners if you provide the solutions and the content and services. This one here talks about the shift or the kind of the breakdown of the developed world up here on the right is very high on the percentage of data as a portion of their bill. And this is the size of the bill. So you see up in these countries have a big size bill and a good portion of it being data. Where you get down here, India, Brazil, Greece, you see countries that have a smaller bill and a lower portion of it being data. This is interesting because this demonstrates, if you believe that the developing world very closely follows the developed world, that there's a fair bit of opportunity here. Countries like India have a fairly sizable population, and as they come online and they start following the trends that we're following right now, the pipeline for selling products and services that are innovative, that match data services, that match Silicon Valley with dial tone, is very, very long pipeline. Other thing I mentioned is that you see all kinds of technology. where the developing world follows the Western world. And not the least of which, a simple example is cars. But it tends to follow, historically, maybe 40, 50 years behind as their wealth slowly approaches what ours was before. In the case of telecommunications, it also was very far behind because putting in fixed line infrastructure was very expensive. So when we talk about phones with a fixed line context, the developing world always trailed the Western world by many, many decades. But when you talk about mobile, what's amazing is all of us have observed the amount of lag between what we're doing and what India is doing is tremendous, it's incredibly short. They're following quite closely behind. And if you go to Africa and you ask people, if you had a certain amount of money, what's the first thing you would buy? A mobile phone is one of the top answers these people would give you and have given on a lot of studies on that. So what we see is we don't have to wait 50 years for them to be our customers, and that's a good thing for our businesses. And also, we don't have to wait 50 years for them to reach these communication services and be able to access the internet and essentially all the information in the world. And that's a good thing for human development, and it's the state of their wealth and the opportunity they have for developing their businesses and their economies. I'm going to skip this slide. Just talks about how data is an incredibly huge problem and how if you've got a solution for data right now, that's one of the hottest things to have. And here I talk about, as I said, the telcos are the companies that gather up the money. Well, how much money do they gather? China Mobile is pulling in just about $20 billion a year. Vodafone, $15.2 billion. Verizon, $14.2 billion. These are big piles of money. When they collect them all every month and put them in a pile, that becomes a very big source of money. So if you have a solution that sells into that company, you can tap a portion of that. Now, you're not going to get it all, but they'll share something with you, and I think we're going to hear today that they're willing to share. We, as I said, have always been very sanguine here. We've never said telco partnerships are easy. For somebody coming from a Silicon Valley culture, they appear terribly slow. And a lot of people run out of cash runway before they actually sign the contract and make the deal. You go through a lot of testing and vetting, and that's fairly painful. Telcos expect fairly high reliability, fairly high scalability, which is not typical of the World Wide Web startup that throw things up and they'll rev it tomorrow if it didn't work today. That doesn't work in the telco space. So we won't say it's easy, but we do promise you if you succeed, there's tremendous leverage in distribution. Your idea will now have access, look up here. If you make a deal with China Mobile or Vodafone Group, you got access to 353 million subscribers at once through having a partnership with that carrier. And by the way, once again, we never promised it's easy. You make a deal with Vodafone, it doesn't mean it goes out to every region immediately. There's work in pushing that out to the regional CEOs in each country as well. But these are the channels to these subscribers. And I also note that a great number of these people are members of the Telecom Council. Alternatively, they have offices here in Silicon Valley. They're currently looking for the innovators. So that need for the telcos, the fact that they're out of their comfort zone, and they need to access now new kinds of content to fill the data pipes. They need access to services. They need the management software, the massive data handling capabilities that they didn't formerly have. They certainly did billing, but for handling, for example, tweets and social networks and things like that. The ability to analyze data on the fly, provide real-time services that link what you're watching on an IPTV network with what your friends are tweeting about and recommend shows to you and things like that. These are all things that are new to the telcos and that they're looking for innovators to help them with. And as I said, massive change from 10 years ago. 10 years ago, there were multiple phone companies who had offices here, maybe 6 or 7 had field offices. But what's happened is over the past decade, more and more have realized we need to tap in. We can't just wait for these people to knock on our door because they might not even knock. They might just go over the top. But even then, if we wait in our country, home country, for the innovators from our country and from abroad to knock on our door, trends will just pass us by. And competitors in other countries might grab on them and be ahead of us. But even worse, competitors in our country are going to grab onto them and get ahead of us. We need to be the first to find out about these things. We need to be the first to adopt the good ideas. And as a result, we've seen a great increase in the amount of activity here in Silicon Valley, which I humbly claim is one of the hubs of innovation and creativity worldwide. So we've seen, this is the past year, by the way. So this is in the past year since our last TC3. Vodafone has added a facility in the Bay Area. Verizon opened an innovation lab up in San Francisco. AT&T Foundry We talked about AT&T Foundry. They're one of our keynote speakers last year. They were talking about how they were going to launch the Foundry facility. Well, that has now opened in partnership with Ericsson, and they processed, I believe, 300 startups already. They looked at 300 business plans, and they also have an incubator of sorts where they come in and they provide a test bed and such. So that launched this year. KDDI grew their local staff. Singtel added a Ventire fund, which is a lot like a venture fund for those of you who don't know how to spell like me. Docomo Innovations, Docomo's relaunched themselves with an innovation center here in Silicon Valley, and that just happened at the end of the summer. And we know we're actually in talks with a lot of companies that are talking to us about saying we'd like to open up facilities there as well. So we know a bunch of other telcos are looking at joining in. So these guys are very serious. They're investing money, they're investing time, and they're also investing in changing their processes of adopting technology. And we're going to hear a lot about that from them today. But they're laying down processes inside their company so that instead of having multiple doors and it's kind of like a maze for the startup to know how to get in, they're trying to rationalize that and say, listen, here's the right entry door, here's the process we're going to try to have you follow, and we'll try to get to a yes or a no in a partnership as quickly as we reasonably can. So more and more telcos are putting that process in place, which is very important. And I would say that still is not going to make it easy. And any entrepreneur, Silicon Valley, VC-funded company here that wants to do a partnership with a phone company, I think the timing is great. They want to work with you. You might want to work with them because of their scale and because they have the piles of money. It all makes good sense, but it's still not going to be easy. There's still going to be some kind of a culture clash. But what's happened is the telcos are starting to try as much as possible to talk entrepreneur language and understand where you're coming from. And the entrepreneurs, I think, are doing a better and better job of understanding that the telcos don't want throw it up and let's see if it works type of technologies. They want more proven scalability. They want more proven scalability and reliability and uptime. And so we're starting to have the messages get closer and closer together. And as I said, this to the credit of both sides. And I think both sides made some mistakes over the past decade in their expectations from the other party. What the neat thing about that is we'll hear today from a variety of telcos who are specifically trying to bridge those gaps. So ones who say, listen, we're going to, they like the Foundry from AT&T, we're going to put a test bed in because we know it's really hard to get into our production network with a test. But so we created this specific environment so we can test things more quickly. So they see the processes are being put in place. And I think I'm very optimistic. I think there's a lot of honest effort on both sides. And hopefully that speeds the flow of innovation. So that is kind of what I was hoping to say to set the stage for today. And it's great because it's a nice segue into the first thing on our agenda.